A 19-year-old girl points her phone at smoke rising over her own city. She's not a spy, she's not a soldier, she's just filming what's happening outside her window. Weeks later, she's on camera again, but this time she's not filming. She's apologizing, begging for forgiveness, because in Russia today, watching a drone strike hit your hometown and pressing record can end with a criminal case against you. And she is far from the only one. So what exactly is the Kremlin so afraid people might see? In the small Russian village of Bashmashkovo, mothers stopped waiting by the window for their sons to come home safe from the front. They started waiting by the road, because the danger wasn't in Ukraine anymore. It was showing up at their own doorstep. Recruiters have been roaming these streets, grabbing able-bodied men off the road and forcing them to sign military contracts on the spot. One woman watched her own brother get dragged to the local recruitment office, beaten, and forced to enlist. Others describe something even darker: minors, too young to legally sign anything, beaten anyway, and left in the woods once recruiters realized their mistake. So what do you do when the danger to your family isn't a drone flying overhead? It's a government official walking down your street. Here's what's ironic. The same regime that claims to be defending the motherland is the one terrorizing its own people to keep that defense alive. In Bashmashkovo, the answer wasn't to wait for Moscow to fix it. Residents built their own militia, an estimated 250 people, according to independent outlet 7x7. Some patrol the streets, some maintain vigils in neighboring villages to walk men home safely. Others simply contribute money or spread warnings online the moment a recruiter is spotted nearby. It's a tiny village taking on a national war machine, and for now, it's working. Men are making it home. Families are staying intact. The local police have responded, not with backup, but with threats: disband, or we'll lock everyone up. But if a single village can organize itself to resist the Kremlin's recruiters, what happens when men like Sergei Milkin, dragged from his home despite a heart condition, don't have a militia to protect them at all? If a story like this, regular people organizing against their own government just to protect their families, surprised you, that's exactly the kind of thing this channel exists to cover. Hit subscribe now, because what happens in the next few minutes gets even harder to believe. Sergei Milkin had a heart condition. That should have been enough to keep him home. Instead, recruiters pulled him out of his own house in the settlement of Podgornoye and marched him straight to the local administration building. No medical exemption mattered. No pleading changed anything. He was ordered to sign, and within days, he was on his way to the front line. What happens to a man's body when it's already failing, and the state sends it to war anyway? There's no twist here, no silver lining. Just weeks after being forced to sign, Sergei was dead. His wife, Elena, posted the news herself on a local page because no one from the military bothered to explain it to her properly. One name, one family, one more soldier the Kremlin doesn't want you thinking about too hard. And Sergei wasn't an isolated case. In Bashmashkovo, recruiters didn't stop at grown men. Minors, legally too young to sign any contract, were beaten anyway, then abandoned in the woods once officials realized their mistake. Not enlisted, not sent home safely, were just left there, as if the beating itself was the point. This is the machinery Putin depends on to keep the front line staffed, not volunteers stepping up out of patriotic duty, but men and boys dragged out of their homes, their medical conditions ignored, their ages irrelevant, their consent optional at best. So if this is what it already costs to keep the current war going, what happens when Moscow needs hundreds of thousands more? Elena had to post her husband's death herself. In most of Russia now, Even that could get you arrested. A 19-year-old girl in Krasnodar didn't set anything on fire. She didn't attack anything. She just filmed the smoke rising over a warehouse after a drone strike, and turned her phone toward the sky like millions of people would instinctively do. Weeks later, she was forced to record a different kind of video, a public apology, admitting guilt for simply capturing what was happening around her. What exactly did the Kremlin think she could do with that footage that was so dangerous it required a public confession? Here's the irony. Officials claim these bans exist to stop Ukraine from using the footage to aim its next strike. But the punishments go far beyond military secrecy. They're being used to silence ordinary witnesses to their own reality. The restrictions have spread fast. According to the Russian human rights group Department 1, filming drone strikes is now banned in roughly 2/3 of Russia's regions. In Moscow itself, any footage of the aftermath of what officials call terrorist attacks is now off limits. Some individuals face charges of treason. Others risk up to 20 years in prison for a video clip. One pro-Kremlin TV host put it bluntly on air: anyone who shares this kind of footage needs to be thrown in prison. And it isn't stopping at individual videos. Russia's own security service has reportedly begun laying the groundwork to block Telegram entirely, accusing its founder of failing to shut down channels used to coordinate attacks. If the Kremlin is willing to threaten an entire platform just to control what people see, how far is it willing to go to control what they believe? If the Kremlin can silence what people see, the next step is controlling what they believe. Drones are hitting Moscow. Refineries are burning in regions that haven't seen war in generations. Ordinary Russians are watching smoke rise over their own cities. So who does Vladimir Putin blame for all of it? Not Ukraine's drone operators, not the strikes themselves. NATO, the West, what he calls Nazi forces in Kiev. How does a leader convince millions of people that the country attacking them isn't really the one to blame? At a recent Navy Day address, Putin doubled down on the same script he's used since 2022, framing the invasion as a defensive response to Western aggression, insisting Russia did not start any wars, and painting Ukraine's southeast as a region that only ever wanted closer ties to Moscow. It's the same story, recycled for a public that's now hearing air raid sirens in their own hometowns. And he didn't stop at justifying the past. He told naval personnel that Russian society needs to be imbued with a deeper understanding of the cause, framed not as a choice, but as a duty to the motherland. That's the real function of this messaging, not to explain the war, but to redirect the anger it's creating. Lost a loved one? Blame NATO. Watched your city burn? Blame the West. Struggling with rising prices and vanishing brands? Blame anyone, except the man who chose to start this and the one still choosing to continue it. But there's a problem with recycling the same script for years. Eventually, people notice the ending never changes. No victory, no peace, just more smoke. So how long can blaming the West keep working, when the West isn't the one showing up to drag your brother out of his house? Blaming NATO doesn't fill empty ranks. So Putin's turned to something quieter: paperwork. If everything is going according to plan, why does Putin keep quietly signing paperwork to grow his army? In June 2026, he signed a decree adding over 7,000 people to Russia's armed forces. A month later, he signed another one, this time for 25,000 more. That brings the total to more than 2.4 million personnel, including over 1.5 million servicemen. On paper, that sounds like strength. In practice, it's a confession. Why does a country supposedly winning need to keep replacing its own soldiers, month after month. Because the front line isn't holding ground, it's holding losses. Russian forces have struggled to capture even small stretches of territory, while casualties keep climbing. Every fresh decree isn't expansion, it's replacement. It's the Kremlin quietly admitting, through bureaucracy instead of television, that the men it already sent aren't coming back. And this is exactly why recruiters are showing up in villages like Bashmakovo and Podgornoye, dragging out men with heart conditions and teenagers too young to legally sign anything. Not because Russia has too few contracts, because it has too few people left willing to sign them voluntarily. 2 decrees, tens of thousands of new personnel, and still, by every account, not enough. So if the math already doesn't add up now, what happens the moment Moscow decides it needs hundreds of thousands more, all at once? While the Kremlin adds names to military roles, other Russians are quietly removing themselves from the country entirely. If Russians truly believed the war was going fine, why are so many of them quietly packing up and leaving? Not to protest in the streets, not to speak out publicly, just leaving. Realtors in Yerevan, Armenia, say most of their new clients right now aren't tourists or investors. They're Russians looking for a way out while their passport still lets them cross the border freely. What does it mean when people stop arguing with the government and start voting with their luggage instead? Here's the number that tells the real story. Rental prices in Yerevan have jumped roughly 30% in just 3 months. Some realtors are comparing the surge to 2022, when hundreds of thousands of Russians fled the country the moment mobilization began. Search data backs it up. Queries for apartments in Yerevan spiked to 5,200 in a single week this July. That's higher than the 5,000 searches recorded during the very first week of the invasion in 2022. Telegram channels built specifically for Russians relocating to Yerevan are now filling up daily, with new posts from people who've just crossed the border, or are still planning their exit and want advice from those who already made the move. People aren't waiting for an official announcement to believe something is coming. They're already responding to it. So if this many people are leaving before mobilization is even confirmed, what do they know that the rest of the country is still being told to ignore? This exodus isn't random, and it lines up with a date that should worry anyone still in Russia. If mobilization isn't official yet, why does it already feel like a countdown? In July 2026, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky issued a warning that cut through months of Kremlin denial. Russian intelligence indicates Putin is preparing to send up to 500,000 more Russians to war. His exact words, "Putin is preparing for mobilization. He will do it at the beginning of October." Why October specifically? Why not now, if the front line already needs more bodies? Because Russia is holding State Duma elections in September. Announcing a mass mobilization before voters go to the polls would be a political risk even the Kremlin isn't willing to take, so the timeline becomes almost mechanical. Hold the elections first, keep the illusion of normalcy intact, then move once the ballots are counted and the optics no longer matter. That single detail changes how you read everything else in this video. The militia in Bashmakovo, the families fleeing to Yerevan, the recruiters already dragging men from their homes months before any official order. None of it is random. It's the early tremors of something the Kremlin has already decided, just not yet announced. So if hundreds of thousands of Russians are already resisting, fleeing, or organizing against a mobilization that hasn't even been declared, what happens the moment it actually is? October is no longer a rumor, it's a deadline, and what happens next depends on who blinks first. Can Putin actually pull off another mobilization without it costing him something bigger than the war itself? For years, the answer seemed obvious. Yes, lies, propaganda, and fear were enough to keep the Russian public compliant, even as the losses mounted. But something has shifted. The same playbook that once worked is now running headfirst into a population that's seen too much to keep pretending. So what happens when the fear of the front line finally becomes smaller than the fear of staying silent? In Bashmachovo, 250 people didn't wait for permission to resist. They built a militia instead. In Podgornoye, a widow refused to let her husband's death disappear quietly and posted it herself. In Yerevan, rental prices are climbing because entire families are leaving before they're forced to stay. None of these are isolated stories anymore. They're the same reaction, showing up in different corners of the same country, a refusal to keep playing along. Putin still has the decrees, he still has the recruiters, he still has state television repeating the same script about NATO and the West. What he doesn't have anymore is a population that fully believes it, and a mobilization built on force, not conviction, doesn't just risk losing soldiers on the battlefield. It risks losing the last thing keeping this regime standing, the illusion that the public is still behind him. October is coming. So is the moment Putin finds out whether fear can still hold a country together, or whether this is where it finally starts to break. If you want to understand exactly why Putin can't afford to stop this war, even now, we broke it down in full in this video right here. And if you want the other side of this story, this video shows how Ukraine built an air force that breaks every rule and keeps getting stronger anyway. Subscribe before you go, because we cover exactly this kind of story every single week.